you. Welcome everyone to the READ seminar and to our excellent speaker today, Associate Professor Benny Wilson. Welcome to our group seminar. So before I start, let me begin by acknowledging the Ngambri and Ngunnawal people, traditional custodian of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So today's seminar will be about the Teaching for a Country research project by Associate Professor Benny Wilson, who is affiliated with the University of Canberra. Yeah, so yeah, over to you, please.
So if I'm presenting here, is this the idea that people can see? Oh, actually, they're just going to be seeing my notes, aren't they?
Yes, they will see on the Zoom directly. Yeah,
cool.
Because it will be shared on the Zoom. And that's the camera for our online participants.
All righty. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for the generous introduction. Did you need your phone?
Sorry.
Here, right. And thank you to my friend and colleague Sarah for inviting me to present for you today. I'm going to share some stuff with you about this particular project that we've been working on at the University of Canberra for some time. But I'm only going to try and talk for about 40 minutes. Because if I've got an hour, it's kind of a weird project. So you might want to ask questions, and that's perfectly acceptable. So the first thing that I want to do is acknowledge country. So when we acknowledge country, often, you heard Rini, we're talking about Ngambri, Ngunnawal people, as we acknowledge those traditional custodians, and that's absolutely essential. However, I just want to remind everyone that an acknowledgement is called quite literally an acknowledgement of country. It's not an acknowledgement of people. Now, I'm not saying that Rini did anything wrong, because that's absolutely the way that most people do it nowadays. In fact, what's become enshrined in public policy is to acknowledge the people of this place. My colleagues and I argue, though, that this is representative of an anthropocentric bend in society in general, where nature and our Mother Earth becomes a pleasant or unpleasant backdrop to the unfolding human drama of our lives and nothing more. That is completely antithetical to what Aboriginal society was like. Hello. So I acknowledge and thank Rini for her acknowledgement of country. I'm going to add my own as well. And I'm going to add my own by sharing a little story with you here and seeing how it sits with you. And this story is the story of Jumble. So you can, and it's this picture. So I hope everyone can see, the fellas in here can definitely see this picture of this school, because that's exactly what you're looking at. So this is school. This is Mount Maroon Outdoor Education Centre, which is about 125 kilometres southwest of Meanjin, which in English is called Brisbane, and right in the heart of my country, Jagera country, where I'm from. So you can see the school there, and in the background, you can see a big mountain. Now that mountain is called Mount Maroon in English. It's got that real Aussie drawl, Mount Maroon. But that's not its real name. Its real name is Murrum. Murrum is a goanna, big goanna. It's the start of the big goanna creation story. Sort of starts here. And you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen a shadow. And that shadow is the shadow of a hoop pine. And hoop pine in my language is Jumble. And this story belongs to Jumble. So one day, not so long ago, a teacher who was working at MOEC, which is Marine Outdoor Education Centre, took some students out from the classroom inside to go and learn in the shade of Jumble, as was his habit. And so he went and sat down, and they figured out, using trigonometry and some mathematics that is far beyond my ability to understand, that the hoop pine was roughly 200 years old, just by its base, its height, and length of its shadow. And this meant that it predated European settlement in the area by roughly 50 years. So after they ascertained that, the teacher started telling a story. Now, in our old way, blackfellow ways, we know that when you start telling a story and it just starts flowing through you, it's not your story, it's a story from country. It's a story that belongs to country. And this is what was happening to this teacher this day. And he said, you know, kids, one day, long time ago when Jumble was only a little sapling, it rained. Now, in our old law, our old understanding of the universe, everything has life and spirit. So the life and spirit of the rain hit that big goanna muddle, and it slid down, hit the soil, and slid down the side of the mountain to where Jumble was growing and helped make that soil really fertile so that she could grow. So the life and spirit of the rain, of the soil, of Muddum, all went into Jumble, who also had her own life and spirit. A little while later on, Bunda, kangaroo, came along, nibbled on that sapling, took its nutrients into itself. And so the life and spirit of Jumble, the soil, the rain, the mountain, all went into the kangaroo, helped her grow, helped him grow. I say that deliberately. Because a little while later on, a hunter, one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, went and speared that kangaroo, knowing it was a male kangaroo, because we don't spear the female kangaroos, the breeding females. Speared that kangaroo and was humbled before it for giving its life, and took its meat and fed its meat to his family, including his little girl, my great-great-grandmother. And so that little girl grew up knowing, as she took that food into herself, that there was no difference between her, the rain, the soil, the mountain, the tree, the kangaroo. The rain was her father. Kangaroo was her sister. Pine was her brother. We all belong to our great mother, Gunitha Coon, Mother Earth. That's a nice story. Yeah. And no doubt there are some people online and maybe some people here. I think that's a really nice little story to go around. But what's interesting is it's also absolutely true. And Western science has caught up relatively recently to this, around about 100 years ago. I'll show you how. So as we sit here, people here and people online, so anyone can answer, what is the main constituent of our bodies?
Water.
Water. Do you know how much, brother?
About 2/3, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, for younger people, it's about 2/3. So about 70%, but as we get older, we start losing our water. But we never drop below 50%, roughly about 60, 70%. How many of those water molecules that make up more than 50% of you, more than 50% of me, are unique to you? Meaning they've only ever been on you, in you, created by you.
Zero.
Absolutely zero. Or, to be honest, as close to zero as possible to be absolutely negligible. Yeah. The water that makes up more than half of you and more than half of me, that makes up our bodies, has been in every waterway in the world, has fallen from the sky, has rained, hailed, sleet and snow thousands upon thousands of times, has been in hundreds of other species, and has existed since the beginning of time. That's a pretty humbling thought. The stuff that's not water in our bodies at a molecular level is dirt. So we're all dirt and water. Western science understands this. Our people have understood it for thousands and thousands of years. So what my old grandfather, Paul Gordon, says is we're all country with a river running through us. So when you hear old blackfellas say, I am country and country is me, they're not being metaphorical. Yeah. I remember when I first heard it, I'm, city boy, city blackfella, grew up in Brisbane, came down here. I remember when I first heard it and thought, that's a really nice little story, nice little metaphor. I'm country and country is me. They're not talking metaphorically. They mean it. They are country. But if that's the case, if we are all country, why do we disrespect her? Yeah? Why do we do things that bring her undone? Because we all have responsibility and obligation in this place. So I want to acknowledge the country that I live on here. Oh, and the other thing that's really important, and this was a really important story for me during COVID, is that if you've been in the country more than 6 weeks, every single one of those water molecules in your body is renewed through the water that you drink and the food that you eat. So if you've been in a place longer than 6 weeks, you are literally of this country. More than 60%. Now, the reason why I say that is I was talking to Keith earlier on, he's from Toronto, and I'm from Brisbane, Meanjin. I'm sure lots of people come from different places here. And during COVID, I really suffered, because I felt really disconnected from my home. Often now, I try and avoid the language of I'm a Jagera man or Jagera country is my country, because I think that positions country in a really problematic way. More than that, and I think that the tribal boundaries are problematic as well, but it's probably a talk for a different time. So more than that, I say I belong to a special mountain up there, Jumble. So Jumble, white fellas call Mount Cravat, which some of you online, some of you might have experienced, and you might have been there. But I say I belong to that mountain because I grew up as a young boy playing in its shadow. As a man, I walked on its paths, I did teaching, and I learned a lot up there. I sat and I was with country and connected with that place. And so I feel really deeply connected to it. The problem, of course, is when I came down here, I said very clearly to the University of Canberra, I initially worked at ANU and then went back up to finish my PhD, came back down to do work at the University of Canberra as a teacher educator. And when I came back down here, I was really clear with UC that I need to be able to go back to Queensland whenever I needed to for cultural refreshment, you know, to go and see not only family, but to be with country and get renewed by Jagera. No one predicted once in a 100-year, you know, COVID event. They call that pandemic. No one's fault, but I couldn't get back up there. So I got real depressed, got real sad. What ended up happening was I was getting really depressed and just all in my being just wanted to be back home with mum and dad and back, you know, in the shadow of that mountain. My old grandfather, Paul Gordon, came down and he stayed with me for a little while. And when I was telling him about how sad I was and upset, he said, Benny, you know, you got to remember about that old story. If you've been here longer than 6 weeks, you're of this country. And if you're really being a man, an Aboriginal man, you've got to remember that you have obligations and responsibilities to this country. So it's all right to miss your home country. It's fine. But if you're doing it to such an extent that you forget what you need to do here, that's a problem. And that really helped me. So remembering my responsibilities and obligations to Canberra, this beautiful place, I'll tell you why that's problematic in a second, but to this place, I felt better about myself. Now, I fell into a little trap there, and this is all part of my acknowledgement. I don't like describing country as beautiful anymore, because my thinking is, if you're friends with a woman and the most, you know, the highest compliment you can give her is she's beautiful, it's probably a problem with your relationship. This country is sacred. This country is important. This country nourishes us. That's how we should talk about country. It can be beautiful as well. Doesn't matter if it's not beautiful. It's all sacred. So that's a Jumble story. And in sharing that story, I wanted to put country at the center of my acknowledgement. Yeah, there's country in Jumble on Jagera country up there, but also connect that to this place, this sacred country. And in doing that, I also acknowledge Ngambri and Ngunnawal people whose ways of being have kept this place sacred and have kept it healthy and thriving and strong for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So that's the first little entrance into what we're doing. Now, that was a long acknowledgement, but it also, I cheated because it's an acknowledgement and also kind of sets the platform for what I want to talk to you about. All places. This was the first education system. This is what education looked like that built that most sustainable society that I've been talking to you about. That was what it was all based upon. Encouraging children, students to know, understand and care for their local places. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Just in case.
Yeah, that was my fault.
No, that's okay. Just say the cat.
Kat, are you right? Are you recording again, mate?
Yeah, I started recording again. Is that all good?
Thank you, mate. Yes.
You're all good.
All right. Is it worthwhile going over that again? I think you can read it. I pretty much spoke verbatim, you know, so. All right. So in terms of indigenising curriculum at UC, what we've been doing in our tertiary education space, our approach is derived from the central ethic of knowing, understanding and caring for country. We were really curious, well, if that's the case, why do we silo Indigenous knowledge within Indigenous units? When we first came down, it was about Indigenous perspectives in primary schooling, Indigenous perspectives in secondary schooling, Indigenous ways of knowing. But if we're really serious about getting this stuff embedded, why is it siloed? Siloing isn't embedding, siloing is separating, pushing stuff away. So we want it in all classes. So in that case, we said, well, but when, you know, I was an English teacher, Spilly had a bit more varied experience as an educator, but I think it was primary and different stuff in high school, but I was primarily an English history teacher. We're not experts in PE or maths or science, but we have an entire faculty of people who are. So what we wanted was a project that offered mentorship and coaching in these processes and activities that were related to the ethic. So we recruited colleagues who were interested in this kind of stuff and getting it done in their particular units. In doing this, we use this process. This is the 6 L's, which is a pedagogical framework for being with country. So when I spoke about the first education system, this was the curriculum organizer for the first education system. So Uncle Paul talks about the 6 L's. The first L is law. Law, L-O-R-E. So law are the stories for a place. He says, you've got to know the stories. To do that, you've got to go out and experience stuff. Talking to my friend Sarah, friend and colleague Sarah Milne here, talking about how beautiful Crawford School is and how she goes outside and sits on that in that beautiful wooded area overlooking the lake. So going out and having those experiences and developing your own stories in those places, learning the stories that exist out there already. That's what you've got to do. That's what the old fella, Paul Gordon, says was all about the first stages of education. Get people out and experience things. When they do that, they will love the place more. They'll develop an affection for it. He says he's often challenged in this, primarily by Christian people. No disrespect to Christians if they're only in the room or online, but Christian people often say to him, love has to come before everything. And he says, that's okay in a Christian sensibility, but for us, we can't love things unless we know them. That is what we believe. So we have to know things deeply before we can love them fully, okay? He also points out that people have gone out in the name of love and done some really shitty things, really bad things, and hurt a lot of good people and destroyed some really good things because they thought these people need our love. When they didn't, they need to be left alone. People need to close their mouths and listen. They didn't. Speaking of which, once you go out and you've developed this love and affection for a place, you'll look at it with different eyes and listen to it with different ears. You'll notice more things. And because of that, you'll learn more. And in learning more, you'll learn more depth to the story, or you'll learn new stories that connect to those first stories. And because you've done that, you'll find an even deeper affection for the place. This place isn't just, a beautiful, loamy soiled place that grows good box trees. It's also home to a lot of native bees. So you've learned stories about native bees. Then you learn about the life cycle of native bees, and you realize native bees have a really strong role to play in keeping us all alive. So you love the place more. So what Uncle Paul says is you go through this many, many times, spiraling ever and ever deeper into an understanding of country. And only after you've done that many times are you ready to get to the 6th L, which is lead. He says another problem that happens with the 6 L's is people go through this iteration once, they learn a little bit about their place, and they go off like a bloody crazy kangaroo, try and get everything done. Yeah, they haven't learned their lessons. So I can't speak for Uncle Paul's country. I am humbled and privileged to have gone out there and learned a lot on his country, a real lot. But I haven't learned nearly as much as that old man. So I'm not ready to lead for Gurrugili country, not even ready to lead for Jagera country. Yeah? I'm still going through that process, and we should all go through that process. That doesn't mean that we can't offer students opportunities to learn. It just means that we're not full leaders yet. I hope that's clear. So look, this is the model that came out of my PhD, because I was really interested when I first, and look, I'm guessing that most people in here have done a PhD or are doing a PhD. You get really excited, about your idea. You're like, yeah, I'm going to shift everything. I'm going to change the world with this idea. And so what I really want to do is say, well, the old stories, they were what built the first education system, and that's what we need to go back to. So I took that idea and I went to Brisbane and I went, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to learn all those old law stories and shift everything, change the education system, build a pedagogical framework which will help everyone. I didn't learn any of them. I learned very few of them. So I was a bit naive. Yeah, you go up into a place like that, and for various reasons, political reasons, historical reasons, the tragic reason that sometimes these stories have just been forgotten, they're not readily available. So when I was going around asking people, tell me the stories for this place, tell me the stories of Brisbane, old black fellas, in communities, people in schools, what are the stories of this place? They gave me really 3 to 4 different categories of stories. So the first one's when I said, what are the really important stories to you about this place? Sometimes they're talking about the Bible. Sometimes they talk to me about, their religious texts. And they say, well, the Bible teaches us this about country. Or, the Quran teaches us this. Yet more people, I know you're going to laugh when I say this, but it's true, say, well, where I really got my governing stories was from watching Star Wars. Learning about the Jedi, learning about how we're in balance with all things and nature is all around us and force surrounds us, all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what, gave me my governing perspective on life. So what I realized was they were offering me what I sort of I identified as moral folklore stories. So these are the stories that are about us. Who are we? What brings us to country? Yeah, they don't necessarily teach us about country, but they give us the grounding to how we need to be with each other and with country, but they're very personal, anthropocentric. So then when I kept going and said, well, what are the other stories? Sometimes they told me really factual stories. Like, well, I know a lot about the life cycle of bees. Yeah, like one of my brothers is a really, really clever bee man. Yeah, so he knew a lot about that and he knew all the facts. I said, well, those are really good too, but he didn't really tell me anything about, his personal experience with bees, not at first. So I went, well, they're not really stories we can base an education system on. So then I got to some juicy stuff where I started saying, so what about your personal stories of interaction with this place or interaction with bees or interaction with kangaroo or interaction with murrum? And people started sharing more personal stuff. Yeah. They also started sharing shared stories, which I call stories of country, because these are the stories that where people were saying, I remember marching for rights from Musgrave Park to Brisbane, the Brisbane City Hall in 1974. I remember marching for that. I remember being arrested up at West End because a riot broke out and the police just started walloping us and we all got arrested. So those stories were really important to them as well, and that connected them to that place, to Meanjin, to Brisbane. Then when I started talking to some older people, and they started trusting me a bit more, they did give me those old law stories, which I call stories from country. So those law stories, often people talk about as Dreamtime stories. So like I said, those were what the education system was based upon, but there were lots of them, literally millions all across the country. They taught people really valuable stuff, but they're really hard to come by. Some of them, we never like to say they're lost because they belong to country. So as long as country's there, they're always there. But you can only access them by spending a lot of time on country or having it shared with you by a story keeper. And sometimes that takes longer than a lifetime. So those kind of 4 stories were shared with me. And the reason why I said 3.5 is because not many law stories or Dreamtime stories, I don't like the word Dreamtime, but law stories were shared with me. And so I was thinking, well, I hope that I'm not the only person who's got there in their PhD. You're sitting there with all this data and you think, what am I going to do with this now? Because I had an idea and it's falling apart before my very eyes. What I realized after talking with some people was that we could create our own stories, our stories for country, based upon all these different stories that were happening for us in that place. But as you can see, number 5 there, these stories need to be place-based and encourage us to know, understand, and care for that place. So they're about having personal interactions with the place, but then critically committing to caring for and understanding that place better. The reason why this is exciting is because it gets us out of our heads. I don't want to put Sarah on the spot because I've spoken about her a lot, but I would wager that when she goes and sits out and reads her book under those trees, there is often times where she's completely out of her head, puts the book down and just sits and is with country. We want more people to have experiences like that because we don't think that it's very common. We want more children to have experiences like that because critically, often when you're sitting under a tree doing nothing, people say you're being idle. Why aren't you studying for NAPLAN? Don't you have that big English test tomorrow? Shouldn't you be doing something? We are doing something that's really critically important. So we want people to start developing their own stories of connection, but that's sort of the category 3 stories, going out and being connected there, feeling this close connection. But it's easy to feel a connection and go, I really love this place. Anyway, let's tear it down and make a car park. Yeah. If you really feel that, if you go through the 6 L's and you feel a sense of obligation and responsibility to this place, you'll start caring for it more. You won't accept that kind of stuff. So for us, you know, the end game, without putting too, you know, going too far, is, you know, an entire society of children who to not mine the earth and not, you know, create horrible problems where we release enormous emissions into our atmosphere and we do horrible things to the country. That is as foreign to them as turning up to work with no clothes on would be for us. It's something they just won't have to think about eventually because it's been embedded in their education system. It's been embedded in who we are as a society. And that's what it was for thousands and thousands of years. So this is the project. So what we did was get our colleagues who, you know, had varying levels of connection and relationship with country. We said, well, we want you to come in and experience our stuff. And sit there and you know, go out onto country, have these experiences with country at the same time as our students were doing the same thing, because that is a core focus of the work that we do at UC. You know, we have readings for our units, but we say very clearly, these readings are only there to support the experiential work that should be going on for you. If we ask you to go out for 20 minutes a week to spend time on country and you tell us you don't have time, our question is going to be, did you have time to do your readings in the other classes? Because if you did have time to do those readings, that work is critical for us, and they've all kind of accepted that. So we much prefer them not to do the reading and just spend some time on country. But we said to our colleagues, can you go out there as well and spend some time and observe and just be? And they did. So that was in semester 1, 2021. Then semester 2, they indigenised their units. So they took some of the stuff that was going on in our master's class. So they came and worked with me. They saw what I was doing. They saw the way that things were set up. They saw the on-country practice that we put together. And critically, they said, we can do this. Because a real problem with this stuff, and I think some people use it as a shield and some people are genuinely scared, is they say, I don't want to offend anyone. And because I don't want to offend anyone, I'm not going to embed this in my practice. Well, what our old people say is this is everyone's business. You've been here more than 6 weeks, you're of this country. You're obligated to it. You're responsible for it. And so if you're a teacher, you've got to teach other, your job, your responsibility in the world is to teach other people to be obligated and responsible for the places they inhabit. So these two white, non-Indigenous academics said, we're going to do this. And they did. December, I wrote it. Well, it wasn't December, actually, it was like June the next year, because I guess I'm lazy. I submitted the first paper. And then, but during that, while I was doing the paper, I was also, you know, going back, did my Indigenous course, but I got my colleagues to teach it primarily. Because what we really wanted to set out was it fills people with a kind of existential dread to have a non-Indigenous person teaching this Indigenous unit. But if we're really indigenising the curriculum and if we're saying it belongs everywhere, well, sure, there are absolutely things that non-Indigenous people cannot do. Fine. But if we have the central ethic of knowing, understanding, and caring for country, then everyone should be doing that. So they did it with me in the classroom as well, yeah. And there was stuff that only I shared, and there were stories that only I shared, but it was about my two colleagues and their personal experiences with country. And we said, so what we're doing is really deeply embedding an ethic of knowing, understanding, and caring for country, which is at its core an Indigenous ethic, not the Indigenous ethic, but an Indigenous ethic. So now semester 2, which is July, November 2022, we're just all doing our own thing. So they've indigenised the work in their units. I'm doing the work in my unit. We've got a little, and we've got 2 more colleagues who said we want to put our hands up and do this stuff. And Mike and Margie, my 2 colleagues, they're the ones who are helping me out with it. So what we wanted and what we found, so we're pretty happy here, was we wanted to investigate how a combination of immersive country-based experiences, team teaching, cultural mentorship impacts learning across unit specialties. We want to explore transformative learning and want to investigate the impact upon student satisfaction and learning with relation to their university experience. So that last one is what I'm going to talk to you about and share with you here. So this is the kind of stuff that our students were talking about. So after we did our indigenisation of the curriculum, while we took them through this unit, these are the kind of things they said. This is what education should really be like. It changed how they viewed Indigenous education in a really positive way. Critically, and what I thought was really interesting was it prepared them for the realities of teaching. This is what they reflected. Yeah? It challenged their existing beliefs, but in engaging, supportive ways. Now, I'm not sure, I have a little bit of experience with ANU. A lot of universities talk about Indigenous units being a real challenge for them because people switch off or people feel that they're, scared about trying to do anything in the Indigenous space. Students often report feeling really hammered and hurt by what's going on. Now, I'm not passing judgment on any of my Indigenous colleagues in the university space, but all I'm saying is with the work that we're doing here, the feedback is they feel challenged, but in really supportive ways, which for me is kind of the point of education. So in both the unit and the on-country practice, there's a sense of being connected to something larger than themselves. Now, what we've always said is that we're all born connected. We've got no choice in it. Through the water in our bodies and the dirt in our bodies, we're all connected to the places we are. What we unlearn is a relationship. We need to be in relationships with country. And so this language isn't quite right, but what they're actually talking about is I developed a further relationship with the place I inhabit, which would make my old man smile. They talked about struggling to get out of their heads, but a recognition of the importance to try. So I just want to talk here about mindlessness versus mindfulness. Often these kind of activities, when we go out in country, people say, let's practice mindfulness. But for blackfellas, the mindfulness, if you think about the Gugar story, is problematic. It's not about being in your mind. So we want people to wander, but we want them to wander aimlessly, or not aimlessly, mindlessly. But mindless and without purpose are two different things. We want them to get in their bodies and experience things here. And finally, the value of the experiential over the abstract. Now, we're getting a lot of feedback, and universities in general are getting a lot of feedback that we're heavily theory-based and we push students through at a phenomenally quick rate. They said that the units that we're doing, it's good to stop. And it's good to breathe. It's good just to be, to really take stock of what I want as an educator, because everything else was kind of taking them down a path where they felt, well, I've got to have 8 assignments due on Friday and I'm panicking about everything, but I'll just quickly do that, get 4s and 5s, and now I've graduated with a teaching degree. But have you really learned anything? So they talk about the value of experiencing things rather than just learning about abstract theory.
Oh, Ben, sorry to interrupt. We only have 10 minutes left.
Oh.
Good to have 5 minutes at least by the end for question and answer.
I can talk and talk and talk and talk. Fortunately, that's the end of my presentation.
Oh, just good better to question and answer.
Let's do some questions and answers first. I've got a video. So we did a unit. So we said we want an assessment item that's not rational analytical. We want people to go out and do things and show their connection physically. So I've got a video of someone who did that, which I'd love to share with you, but maybe we'll take some questions and answers first and then I'll show it at the end. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Oh, there I am.
Yeah, there you are. So these are our online participants here. And yeah, please, anyone, if you have any questions, Paul, but could you please come forward?
I've got to come up.
Yeah, so that online participants can hear you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ben. I don't know, there's a lot in your presentation that spoke to me about, I guess, the relationship. So I work on water, and the relationship that I'm developing, or trying to develop with country in terms of working here. But the question I wanted to ask was a bit more practical, not practical, but so at the Crawford School and ANU generally, we've moved towards this dual delivery teaching, right? And the rule is that you have to offer what you offer the online students as what you offer in person. So this semester, I've been telling students about the Dixon wetland, right? A constructed wetland that they had there, the different values associated with it. And I wanted to communicate that, and I wanted to take the students there, but I couldn't take the online students there. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I could do a video, but it wasn't going to work. How do that drive towards online teaching, do you have any advice on how to overcome that?
Yeah, so I have advice, but it's not particularly helpful, to be honest with you. So look, we had a very similar thing happen with us, and it was kind of embarrassing in that we swore blind, we cannot do this online. And we told people, this is in June 2019. This is not an online course. We can't do it online. We have to have people coming in. We don't want, international students, if they come, of course they're welcome, but not from Fiji, not from China, not from over there. They got to come and be part of this. And then COVID hit, and they're like, well, how's that? So we watered it down really to a point that we were still, okay, they're getting bare minimum stuff. But we got to a point where we were happy with it. Now, the advice that I'd give to you for something like that is we've really resisted hard. So we've said this work, if you're indigenising the curriculum, it's experiential. If you want me to indigenise the curriculum, it's experiential. There's no way around it. Your online students are not going to get the same experience as what your in-person students are going to get. And there's no way around that. It's to the point where we've said, quite clearly, we will do our absolute best to make sure that everyone is catered for, but there's some stuff that with blackfellow knowledge that needs to be shared in person. If you're serious about indigenising the curriculum, we're not online. You can't do it all online. So something's got to give. And we've been pretty, we're really, really happy how supportive our colleagues and our dean, the Faculty of Education at UC have been, because we've given them some pretty hard lines and they've worked really hard to accommodate us. But I'm sorry, brother, apart from saying resist, there's not much advice I can give you. So yeah, thank you.
Right, Ben, thanks. Any other question from online participants or?
I recognise some of those names.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Oh.
Unless there's someone online. It's good.
Yeah, from online, but just come forward.
Thanks so much, Benny. That was awesome. So I've got a question about how do you get students to reflect upon the experience or share the experience they have? Like if you're getting people to go and sit on country or connect or, how do people make sense of that? Is there, I know you've got a video, maybe that speaks to my question.
No, not
maybe
really.
there's journaling or something, but curious.
No, absolutely. So the first thing that we ask people to do when they go out on country is journal. So we say, don't take your journal onto country with you. Rather, go out and be on country, but keep your journal in the car. When you get back there, start scribbling down thoughts. And in fact, the first assessment piece for our unit is, show us sort of, an amalgamated journal entry of what's been going on for you. But then what's really critically important is that we set up the right processes when we're in class together. So there's a lot of talking in our classes. There's a lot of sharing. Spilly and I are fortunate, and also, honestly, we're good at what we do. We've developed stuff that make it easier for people to, we've developed and stolen stuff that makes it easier for people to share those really deep, ideas. But what people often report to us as well is at the end, I've been in class with that person for 3 years and I've never said a word to them. But because of the way that this is set up, the unit's set up, everyone has to talk to everyone. And hopefully we do it in a way that's really supportive, even of the shy students. But it speaks again to why it's so important to be there. The online stuff doesn't work that well. We've done stuff where everyone's online and it's okay, but it doesn't compare to the kind of in-person sharing that we think is really critical for this kind of work. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Connections.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. That was an excellent question. Any other question from the participants here or online? Kate, please. Can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really wonderful to listen to. I guess I'm interested in the kind of where to from here for you. Where do you see some of the difficult, or not difficult, but maybe the challenging bits that you're leaning into? Like what kind of is the next push?
Well, look, it's thank you, Kate, for the question. We're kind of seeing it more as a really exciting where next. So Mike Davies and Margie Appel who did our work with us were so enthusiastic about it and did such a good job. And now we've got other colleagues who are really enthusiastic as well. We're just really excited about the next phase of the project, which is where Mike and Margie get to offer a little bit of mentorship. But we also have a partner project with the Teaching for Country project called the Country as Teacher project, because Spilly and I are absolutely terrible at naming things. And yes, the budgets often get mixed up because we name them so bloody similarly. But that's the work that we take on in schools. So 4 schools in the ACT from 2021 to 2022 did work with us indigenising the curriculum. So while I was working with tertiary students, we were also working in schools with established educators. And we've just applied for more funding to go into 2023-24 to extend the Country as Teacher project. So yeah, it's exciting. It's a good time. We're very happy with what we're doing.
Yes. So many appreciation. Yeah, we learn a lot, Ben. Really, thank you. Yeah.
No worries. Would you like to see this video of what a student came up with? Do you have time? Is that all right? Yeah. So this is just there. Oh, share screen.
Is it okay for the online participants?
Yeah, I can see this one. So this is, so we asked students to go out and develop their own stories for country, to go and experience country, and then to say, okay, well, if I'm going to experience country, I'm going to embed those kind of lessons in the work that I do. So they develop not only a story for country, but a song and a dance for country. This was done during COVID, so it's actually done in groups now, which increases the collaborative, cooperative aspect of what we do. But this student did his own story for country, celebrating his connection with the purple swamp hen. So I know I've gone over time, but just to let you know, so in that story, he's embedding his story of connecting with the place, you know, and he did a lot of learning about the swamp end in order to come up with that. Really important point is he says, you know, it's not just enough to know these stories, but now I'm committed to understanding this thing better and working to make sure that it's safe and taken care of. That's what we should all do. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben, for
No
an
worries.
excellent presentation. We learned a lot, and thank you to Kat Taylor and Sarah, who are the motor behind this excellent presentation. Thank you.